I know people are going to see this that are going to still judge me. I know people are going to see this that have been a part of my story, that maybe remember it different. I know there's going to be people on the other side of this that maybe have a different view of me after. But Jesus brought this to me, so that means it's for me. And I gave him my yes a long time ago. I'm Derenda Russell, and I'm trying to think, honestly, where God wants me to start my story. I grew up, I think I really believe like most girls my age. I'm 36, and, Nickelodeon was a big deal back in the day, and, having ice cream in the summers and spending time with my grandparents and going to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and vacation Bible school. I never missed one. Church camps, anything and everything you can think about that would be like nostalgic. I feel like I experienced that as a child. And I think everybody throughout life has things that are difficult, and it affects us in different ways. I am the youngest of 4 children. We were a blended family. I have 2 older sisters and my brother and myself. And I came from a divorced home. My parents divorced, I think, when I was almost 5. And I always say that my brother was like my safe place, because Andy went everywhere that I went. I mean, if you've seen him, you've seen me. And he put up with me a lot. So Andy even played Barbies with me. Let's be real. He was the greatest big brother ever but hey, I had to play Superman City with him. So there you go. We just grew up, had amazing grandparents, had 2 sets of grandparents, had a great childhood. But I would be lying to you if I sat here and told you that divorce didn't affect me in a negative way. Because when my parents divorced, I was super young. My brother was older. He saw more than I did. But I can truly say that there was this void that was in me at that time, because I felt like it was something that I did. And that wasn't because my parents made me feel that way, or that it was their fault, like that, that was the way that I kind of looked through that lens. But one thing that I've been listening to lately is a guy by the name of Jamie Winship, and he talks about our identity, and he talks about how we all have a God-given identity. And I think that one of the greatest tactics of the enemy is to instill in us, basically from the very beginning, lies and deceptive things, and ways that he can manipulate us into thinking that we are less than, and that we're not valuable and we're not worth anything. And so one of the ways that the enemy used that in my life was through my dad and my mom's divorce, because I had abandonment issues. And I didn't know that as a kid. I just knew that after that happened, I had this desire to measure up, to be enough. And I couldn't, I'm a kid, so I don't know how to process that. My world has changed, but I have a good life with my dad. I have an amazing life. And who I call my mother, and one of the most incredible women that I've ever met in my entire life, is Linda, and she is my mom. She took me in as her own. And so when my dad got remarried, our life was good. It wasn't that it was bad, but the enemy used that time in my life to put seeds of doubt about myself, about my worth, my value. And I was kind of, a little dorky, I was kind of a runt, and I wore glasses. No offense to anybody wearing glasses, but that just wasn't like a cute thing in school. My parents thought it was adorable. And as a mother now, I totally get it. But at that time, I just did not get, I wasn't like all these other kids. And here I had this thing that happened that we don't talk about, which is a divorce, you know. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on that, but I want to set the groundwork to what God does later, because I just want to kind of use that to say everybody has something foundationally, that there's something that the enemy tries to distort to crack that foundation so that you can't build a firm foundation, right? And so for me, that just happened to be my parents' divorce. And it just happened to be that, you know, I had value and worth issues after that. And during that time, I was an overachiever as a kid. I wanted to be, you know, the best at all these things. And I was really, too, I would be clingy with friends because I didn't want them to go anywhere. And I struggled with that for years because I mean, they were my friend. You know, they couldn't be anybody else's friend. And I was that with my brother because my brother was my safe place once again. And I just look at that in my life and I think that was something that I held on to, you know. So, like I said, wasn't that I had a bad childhood, I had a great childhood. But it set this foundation, and there was a couple of cracks in the foundation because I bought into the lies that the enemy planted seeds in my life. And so as those seeds continued to grow, and as we all know, as we start to be awakened to the world and that things aren't just fluffy and unicorns all the time, there's real life stuff happening. And kids sometimes get caught up in that because we're going to fall in a broken world. Let's be real. And so middle school hits for me. And this is going to sound really silly to some of you all on the other side of this. But this is crazy that this affected me till I was 30 years old. When I was in 6th grade, my mom and I went to JCPenney's. It was like the store. And they had just come out with crop pants at the time. Now, I still had glasses. You know, I looked very, still very much 5th grade-ish, okay? Let's be real. But all these other girls looked like models. I mean, they did. They looked like so put together. They had like this expensive makeup and all the things. And here I was, still had my glasses. I remember we went to JCPenney's. I got the little candy shoes with the little wedge on them. They were a big deal. And my mom just thought I looked adorable in these little crop pants. And we had lockers in 6th grade, which was new. And I remember going to that locker and being so proud of what I had on because me and my mom picked that out together. And these girls making fun of me. And that affected me till I was 30 years old. So people saying, no, that didn't affect me. You know, words don't hurt me, this, that, and the other. Like, they're not being true and realistic with you because words absolutely slice like a knife. And the word even says, you know, that there's power of life and death in the tongue. So words absolutely affected me. And that's something that I carried, like I said, but it even fed into what seeds had been planted, that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worth sticking around for, you know, that I needed to measure up, that I needed to be valuable through these ways. And so here I am once again feeling inadequate and less than. And so I struggled through that overachieving through middle school. Music was a part of my life since I was a little girl, 4 years old. My dad put me in front of a microphone. My dad sang Southern gospel music. And music was always kind of that escape for me because I could just get lost in that for hours. And I think my first probably cassette tape was NSYNC, which is hilarious. The days of Justin Timberlake's Jerry Curl. I love it. And then my first CD was No Doubt. You know, that was a big deal. But music was like my escape. And so in middle school, I was in chorus and all the things as well. And that was an identity thing for me. I felt like I belonged somewhere. And so, as you can see, you're going to see throughout my whole story, it's an identity crisis is what it is. I'm trying to fulfill, you know, this void that I started feeling that the enemy planted these seeds in my life. And I'm trying to fill it with all the things because I don't want to feel that way. And I'm trying to find my identity. And I really very much believe that's what's going on with a lot of people today. So hopefully this will help somebody. But So in middle school, like I said, went on and had some great friends. And I just struggled through middle school pretty hard. Emotions became very realistic to me. We didn't have like diagnosis and things like that back then for anxiety and all that. I don't even think that it was a terminology that we used. If it was, I didn't know anything about it. But I can look back and say Derenda was a very anxious little girl. Fears and what have you. But coming into my high school years, formative years, if you will, during that time is when I was like, I want to be different. I want people to look at me different. So I dropped the glasses, threw on a mini skirt, not approved by my father, and wanted attention, right? And so that was another way that I'm trying to have this identity. And of course, I did all the things that I think most kids in that place of crisis will do. Try anything. I tried drinking. I tried drugs. I tried, hooking up with guys. Like whatever it was to feel that for me. And all the while, still going to church, still doing all the things at church, and having this tug of war inside of me because I knew I don't want to be hypocritical. But at the same time, I don't know who I'm called to be, and I don't feel enough, and I feel inadequate. And so what I discovered is that I dived even deeper down into that. So I didn't have what I would consider, amazing friends at that time, because I don't know that I was an amazing friend, if I'm being honest with you. I just struggled through, and I love to joke and laugh and make people laugh and things at that time because it was an escape for me. But all the while, I'm still having an identity crisis and still trying to fill that void that only God can fill, that I've discovered that only God can fill. And gave myself away super young, 15 years old. I mean, I think about it. I have 2 boys now, Peyton's 7, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like 15. That's insane, And it was once again wanting to feel valued and loved and important. And so that started a spiral in me, because once that happened, I went into a pit of just the lowest self-worth. And so I just thought that was how I was supposed to be valued. Now, did my parents know that was going on at the time? No, they would have died. But that was another thing, I was trying to deal with those things on my own, away from them, away from, God, because I didn't even know what that relationship should really be. And so it was just Derenda operating in her own will. And so my hurt hang up and habits that I've had over the years ended up being, mine didn't manifest in drug and alcohol problem. It wasn't for lack of try, but mine became relationships. And I just knew like that if I could just, be enough for that person, that would fulfill me, that would be what I needed. So for a long time, I went through a season of my life where it was almost like, this sounds awful, but it was like a flavor of the week. Because I just didn't know, I have an identity crisis issue, right? And I wasn't finding, my hope in Jesus Christ. I didn't even know what that meant. Like, people would give you scriptures and I would have no way to how to apply that into my life. Like, it's all well and good to know something, but my goodness, like to know how to apply it is a huge thing. And all the while this is going on, there's all kinds of dynamics going on in my life, and I think everybody, has that in life going. Like if you have one thing, you have 14 other things going on. And it seems like when one thing's happening, other things crash at the same time. So for me during that time, because I knew I was making decisions and choices that weren't pleasing to whomever, right, a moral code, then I distanced myself away from anybody that I felt like would feel differently about that. And I did. And I started down a path of just dead-end relationships for a long time. And then one day, when I was like, after I graduated high school, I graduated early even, because I knew that I was made for more. I've always known that. I just didn't know what that meant. And during that time, I graduated high school, went to college. Once again, an identity crisis, so I changed my major like 14 times. And all the while, throughout this entire time, I still had this desire for the Lord. Like there was things within me, ingrained in me, that was like, I know that there is a God, and I believe this God loves me, but he's not pleased with me. Like, it's almost like I looked at him like he's just this big grandfather in the sky that's just ready to zap me whenever I make a mistake. And for whatever, reason, I thought I could outrun him. Is hilarious. And I didn't expect to feel his presence when I failed, because that was like, not what he wanted for me, right? So I had this turmoil inside. And during that time, like I said, relationship after relationship after relationship. I just went through this breakup, and my aunt and uncle lived in Knoxville. I'm from Kingsport, Tennessee originally, small town. Everybody knows everything about you, whether you like it or not. And Knoxville, like, it just seemed like maybe I could just start over. Maybe I could just start fresh and new, and I could just, maybe something could change. And so I thought, maybe I can just go up there for a couple weeks. And I just had this draw to come to Knoxville, and I stayed with my aunt and uncle and my cousins. And my uncle was a pastor at the time, and I had never really seen worship in a church before, like true, like people like getting down. Like raising your hand was kind of like, it was a big deal. So I really didn't know. I did always have a desire for black gospel music. I loved CeCe Winans. Like, she was my girl. And my dad introduced me to her, actually. My dad and I used to have moments in the kitchen where he would turn it on and we would like dance like we actually knew how to dance. It was awesome. And so I always had this love for that. But still, like I said, I hadn't ever really experienced that. And so I go to their church and just fall in love with their worship. Like, I loved everything about that. And just because Derenda always would just make quick decisions, I just up and decided to move to Knoxville. And I did. And I lived here 6 months. And had an encounter with Jesus I'll never forget as long as I live. And that's when I truly understood what it meant to love him and want to live for him. And I was free in my worship. Like, it was really powerful for me. And, but once again, when you have this encounter with God and you don't know, there's a lack of discipleship there, once again, you revert back to what you know. And so for me, it was relationships, right? Find another project. And so I met this guy in the church, moved back home, was going to conquer the world, and we were going to do all these things together. And then we broke up, and I was devastated and broken up about it, because I once again found my identity in relationships and fixing and that kind of thing. And then I ended up meeting another guy that I really wasn't crazy about, if I'm being just honest with you, but he just pursued the heck out of me, and I was in such a broken, dark place at that time in my life. And I'd moved back in with my parents and had no clue what I was going to do with my life, and just felt super strained. And I just decided just to go out with this guy, See, my drug of choice was not, a beer can or a drug, if you will. It was a relationship. So I went right in head first, and 6 months later, I'm engaged to the guy. And I don't even care about him. Like, that's awful, y'all. But how we get to the places we get in life sometimes just, it never ceases to amaze me. The lies that we buy into because of a lack of an identity in Christ. And so here I go, engaged to him. We go to get married. We lose the wedding ring on the wedding day. It's like an omen. And my dad even told me, Derenda, you don't have to do this. We can go back down these back stairs back here, and you never have to do this. But I felt such an obligation to walk down that aisle because my parents had spent all this money, and there was probably 350 people down there. And it was also a value thing for me. What are people going to think about me? How are people going to treat me in this small town? And I went through with it. And I got married. And it was not good. It was never, and I didn't even know what marriage was really supposed to be about. I knew my parents had a good relationship, but I once again didn't know a whole lot about marriage and how God viewed it. And so here I was just stepping into this. And I'm sure my parents were distraught for me because they knew their daughter, and they knew that I wasn't in a great place with it. But they let me make my choices, right? And that's what we have to do. That's what our Father does with us. He knows we're going to have to make our choices because we have free will. So all the while I'm trying to find my identity now in this marriage and being enough for him. And getting down the road, and realize this is really awful because he really went into this as well because I think he felt the same pressure. And I don't have too hard feelings towards him. We just were two different people. We were so young. And it just wasn't good. And so that relationship turned into roommates. And then it turned into not even being roommates, because at least roommates kind of hang out. He ends up being with his parents 6 days a week. And I'm living a separate life. And I've always been, since high school, I ran track, and I loved to just go out and run. It was just something that was freeing for me. And in that season of my life, I started running all the time. I'd wake up and I'd run 13 miles. It was, and I look back on that girl and I'm you were trying to run away from your life. Because once again, I was trying to find my identity in somebody outside of Jesus. And so, obviously, no shocker, but that didn't last. And I was working at a wellness center at the time. And I was just, like I said, I was super low on myself. Was in this supposed marriage. I had been big into youth ministry at the church that we had been a part of. I loved those kids so much. They were like my own, even though I didn't have kids back then. I loved those kids. But I knew that if I didn't walk away from them, that I was going to pull them down a path they didn't want to go down. Because I couldn't keep living that way. So I stepped away from the church, stepped away from youth ministry. I did hurt a lot of those kids in the time frame because they didn't understand. When I talk about those kids, I was 23 years old. And when I talk about those kids, we were close, we spent every weekend together. That was the life that I lived, was with them. And so when I walked away from that, I felt sucker punched because I didn't know who I was, because I had an identity problem, right? I was finding my identity in these youth kids. I was finding my identity in relationships. And validation of people. Finding my validation in my physical body, the way that it looked, what size I wore, whatever it was. Like, you fill in the blank, I did it, right? So here I was working at a wellness center, and had walked away from the youth ministry side of things and was still married to my husband at the time. Met this guy at the wellness center. Would have never been my type, ever. Would not have been attracted to him, to be honest with you. And he was nice to me. That was it. He was nice to me. And like 2 weeks later, I'm shacked up with this guy. And you talk about feeling like the scum on the bottom of your shoe. I just knew. I was like, and I'm still married. I mean, and I'll just say to you, like, if you've ever gone through that before, then you know the ickiness of how you feel. You know how that makes you feel whenever you have to look at yourself in the mirror. It's the worst feeling in the world. Wasn't proud of myself at that time. No shining star moments for Derenda. No gold stars. And I just wanted to be different, wanted to feel different. That was my escape. If I'd have been an alcoholic at that time, that would have been my drink. And I can just say, like, I went into that, and it was hell on wheels, y'all. I'm not going to lie to you, because I hurt people in that process. I created not a great name for myself. I wasn't bought into what I just did, but here I was, and I was in it, right? And so I remember going to Walmart and people telling me I was going to hell. And I had such a fear, like a tangible fear of going to the store because of what somebody was going to say. A very strained relationship with my parents at that time, not because of my parents, but because Derenda had backed away from them. And I just kept heading down this dark path of just trying to find my identity in all these other things. And so I eloped with him. I get married to him. And I'm like, what are you doing, Derenda? Like, I would have brief moments of sanity, and I would think, what am I doing? And we moved to Knoxville. So my second time around the sun. And because I just knew if I could get him up here, I could fix him. There I go again, wanting to have a project piece and fix something else. So we move up here, and we stay in this old parsonage beside the church that my uncle pastored. And my uncle was very gracious to me at that time to just invite me in. Because I was kind of a throwaway at that point for a lot of churches, because let's be real, I mean, I had an affair, and that's not something that people take lightly, and I don't blame them. And so here I was, living in this, trying to make the most of it and the best of it. Started trying to patch up things with my parents then, and they were there for me. My parents were always there for me, but I didn't always receive their help. And I didn't always, take well to the dynamic, because I was somewhat of a know-it-all and somewhat of a stubborn girl. So I moved up here to Knoxville and was trying to fix, everything broken in my life, in Derenda's power, of course, finding my identity in that. And I got involved in a Bible study, and I started really just kind of trying to fill that hole. And I watched this movie during that time called War Room, and some of y'all are familiar with it. And the War Room is really about where, the lady in the movie, she fights against all the things going on in her home and in herself. And she creates this prayer room where she starts just like fighting her battles in prayer. And I knew, like, because like I've told y'all through this whole thing, I've always had that love for God, but didn't have a true understanding of what I had and how that was supposed to look. So anyways, I go and I watch this movie, and I decide I'm going to make me a war room in my little apartment. And I did. And that became my place of sanctuary and my place of peace away from the storms of life. I could go in there, and I started seeking the Lord like I'd never, sought the Lord before, because I was in such a broken place that I was like, if there's any hope for me, it's got to be in God, because I'm trying all the other things. It's just not working. And so on a Wednesday, I found out I was pregnant. And I'll be real with you, I did not want to be pregnant because it was not a good marriage. Without going into too much of his story, it was not a healthy relationship. I went from the frying pan to the fire. It was very verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, lots of abuse there. And I didn't even know that's what it was until I came out of it. That's what was crazy, is when people say that they are okay and they're fine and they're in something like that, please don't judge them, because they really don't believe they are, because that becomes your normal. I remember the first time he spoke to me in a very ugly way, but I was an optimist, so I'd be like, oh, well, he just had a bad day. But then it become every day. And then it's just what you know. It's just you're normal. And so, but I found out I was pregnant on a Wednesday. And I was mixed emotions, because like I said, I did not want to bring a child into that. I thought, God, I was almost mad, because I'm like, God, I don't deserve a baby. I don't deserve, I had family members that wanted children and couldn't have them. And I'm like, and I'm going to have a kid? And this? Are you kidding me? I've made this mess, God. Do you not remember all the messes that I've made? Like, I was kind of frustrated. And I really didn't want to tell my husband at the time, because I didn't think he'd be excited about that. 2 days later, by divine appointment, because I was kind of naive to things, I found out that there was drugs and alcohol that was, I knew about the alcohol struggles here and there, but the drugs was new to me. And I found out that, my husband at the time was using drugs and alcohol. And so I was struggling in that moment, because I thought, I am not going to bring a child into this. There's no way that I'm going to bring a baby into this situation. And didn't really know how to go about telling. But that Sunday at church, there was a lady at the church that used to be like a prayer warrior. And I hadn't told my family yet or anything that I was pregnant. I was very early pregnancy. And, but I told, the Lord, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And, that morning, this lady comes up and lays hands on my stomach. I didn't tell her I was pregnant. And I'm like, well, everybody knows now. The secret's out now. But she lays hands on my stomach, and she said, God wanted me to tell you that this is a gift from him. And that everything that you're worried about, that he's got it worked out. You just got to trust him. And I thought, oh my goodness, okay. And I don't know if there's any mamas out there that can relate to this, but I knew he was a boy. Not because I had some, test or whatever. I just knew that I was carrying a boy. And I knew his name. I knew he was a David spirit, because his mama's a David spirit. I'm a worshiper. And I just knew that boy was a David spirit. And my dad loved Peyton Manning, and I just hold my dad at such high regard, because I just love that man so much. And I was like, he would love to have a grandson named Peyton. And I think Peyton Manning's actually pretty much a good guy of integrity, from what I've heard. I could be wrong, but I think he is. And I just love that name. And so I just knew, I was like, his name's supposed to be David Peyton. And I thought, okay, we're going to do this, buddy. We're going to do this. So I ended up going through that pregnancy. I had a very hard conversation with my parents and told them that, you know, because I had been distant. Like I said, I was working on relationship, coming back into that. But I had distanced them for so long, which I know is painful as parents, because as close as I am to my boys, I can't imagine what my parents felt like in that season. But I think they also understood that I had to figure it out, because they too had gone through things in their life. So anyways, I ended up just really realizing like that he was this gift. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to fix my husband. We're going to fix this. Everything's going to be fine. And I thought, if I can just muster up enough energy for this project, which is hilarious to think about, that I thought I could fix somebody. So I just thought, if I can get my husband to celebrate recovery, that I can fix him, and we can work everything out for Peyton, right? And so I get there wanting to fix him. And I walk in those doors, and I'm looking at him through worship like, are you hearing this? Trying to fix him, right? And the Lord speaks to me like I'm just talking to y'all right now and says, you're here for you. And I was a little frustrated at that, because I thought, I'm not one of these people. And the Lord didn't say anything else. Just like, you got a choice, sister. You can keep doing this the same old way, same junk, different day, or you can surrender to me truly all of your stuff. And I wept, because I knew that I was relieved at that point, because I realized like I was doing it my way. But I was also scared, like, what's this going to look like? And so I started going faithfully to Celebrate Recovery and working on my control issues. We call it codependency, trying to play the role of God, which is exhausting, by the way. It's really exhausting. But I realized I couldn't. The reason I'm so exhausted all the time and I was always screwing up is because I'm not God and I can't play his role. That's not my job. So I met a man there by the name of John Gargis. He was the recovery pastor, and he single-handedly helped change my life. He's still a part of my family today. But I met this guy, and he was authentic, and he was real, and he was transparent, and he was joyful. He was so stinking joyful. And he loved me for me. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to give me a scripture and send me on my way. He genuinely was walking life with me. Him and his wife both. Becky. Amazing people. And I started going every Tuesday night. And I made some incredible friends in Open Share Group. And God started doing a work in my life. And all these people were like just real people with real issues. They weren't polished. They weren't churchy. They were just real. And I loved it. And kind of didn't expect it to be like that, honestly. And they were teaching me how to apply the Word of God in my life for the first time. Like practical application into my life. And I actually started doing it. I actually started doing the work. Started taking the Word of God and putting it into my life. And what I started seeing is my circumstances weren't changing, but I was changing inside. And so as I got better, my husband at the time did not decide to go on that journey with me. He would come in and out as he wanted to. He would do it for a couple of weeks and roll back out and go back out into the things of this, the things that kept tripping him up. And there was a few people that were worried that I was going to miscarry my son because the stress in my life at that time. My family knew at this point what was going on. For one, I lived upstairs from my cousin. So you can't really hide what's going on whenever you literally are in a parsonage and there's one door between you. So, I mean, at this point, everybody knew like that life was crazy, right? And so, but it was sweet for me. It was so sweet for the first time. My circumstances were crap, y'all. But like I had this sweet little nugget inside of me. And I would like put headphones on my stomach and play worship music for Peyton. And he would just do flips in there. And we would just worship together. And I just remember like falling in love with this kid. And so then I had Peyton. My papa was still alive then, which he was always Jesus to me. He was just this strong spiritual beacon. Not because he was a pastor or because he was a worship leader or because he was a Sunday school teacher. No, he visited the shut-ins. He did the maintenance of the church. But he was so Jesus to me. And he got to be a part of Peyton's birth and everything as far as being out there waiting on him. So there's 4 generations out there. It was really awesome. And it was incredible. It's the greatest thing. I remember seeing Peyton for the first time and I said, there's no freaking way that's my baby because he's too beautiful. Like that kid is way too beautiful for me. And I realized like he is a gift to me. And my mom stayed with me for days. We went and got donuts. She bought me high heels. She made me feel all kinds of ways because she knew. She's like, you're going to feel all kinds of ways because your body's changed. And mama always knows, right? And we had the best time. And I had nothing, y'all. I did not. My dad used to say this all the time. I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. I had nothing back then, y'all. I was broke as a joke, but I had everything. God was writing something new in my life. And so I started doing side jobs and things like that because I decided not to go back to work. Really couldn't afford it. So I was like, I got to figure it out, And so I started, doing side jobs and cleaning and all the things just so I could be with my baby. And my ex-husband at the time, things, kept getting worse. I prayed and fasted over my marriage during that time, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And finally, Peyton turned 1. It was the greatest, just sweetest little party, and we just had an amazing time. And not a couple weeks after that, the parsonage caught fire. God woke me up that night. I felt like I was in a fire, and I started going through and praying through my apartment. And the next day is whenever I had a dog at the time named Murphy, and he was going nuts, and he was potty trained. He had been potty trained since I'd had him, and he had used the bathroom in the apartment. Long story short, he could smell what I couldn't see. And we had a fire that was in the ventilation fan coming out of the roof. And so me and Peyton and Murphy got out. And John Gargis was there for me in like 7 minutes. And the fire department was amazing in Knoxville, I'll say that. They were there in no time. And so 2/3 of the property burnt down. And we moved in with my aunt and uncle. They were gracious to have us there. So I had prayed and fasted over my marriage for 1.5 years. We moved in with my aunt and uncle. And here I have Peyton. And probably maybe not even 2 weeks in, he comes in one day and just says he can't do this husband thing, this God thing, this father thing. And I told him if he left that he was not coming back. And he left. And that was the best night's sleep that I'd had in years. And I just thought, okay, Lord, so whatever you want to write's good with me. Like I'm good with it. And so I literally had nothing, y'all. There's so many spots in my story that I wish I could tell you all that I had the time to tell you, but God has been faithful to me this whole time. Even though I'm still in an identity crisis thing and was still trying to fix all the things in my life and control and do, God still kept showing up for me. And So here I am, didn't have a whole lot of anything. Like I said, my aunt and uncle were really gracious to me and my son for letting us stay and live there. We lived there a couple months. I think it was 3 months is where we ended up living there. But before we moved into a duplex they owned. But God started writing my story from there. And he started putting pieces together for me and Peyton from there. And when my husband, J.R. Russell, came into the picture, we were at Celebrate Recovery. We knew each other, but not like that. I was hosting at Celebrate Recovery at this time and had been a part of Step Studies, and he had as well. But I didn't know him, and he didn't know me that way. And I really had surrendered it all to Jesus. Like whatever he wanted in my life, I was good if it was just me and Peyton, because I knew that I couldn't pick people and I knew that I would make a mess out of stuff. And so whatever God wanted, I was good with. And I would have never dreamed that God would have us where we are today, because, and that God would want to use me. Like as icky as I've been, as dirty as I've been, as just vile as I've been about just my flesh ways, just doing things however I wanted to without any regard, that God would use me, because I didn't have that belief system. I didn't realize that's how Jesus operated. So here I was, me and Peyton, and life was just full of joy. Circumstances were tough about things, going through a divorce and things like that again. But here we are. We're together. We're happy. I remember there's some great times, even cleaning, $1 million houses. I'm scrubbing their toilets, but I had joy in my heart. And I'd take him in a pack and play. My little boss would let me. And so that was cool, because people were okay with me bringing him because I was cleaning their house. They didn't care. And those were just really joyful days. And during that time, that's when the Lord spoke about me and JR. And I would have never dreamed in a million years. But God spoke to me on a Tuesday night that that's him. And I knew what the Lord meant. And I didn't tell anybody, because here I was, Derenda always makes messes of things. Everybody knows it. And relationships were my hang up, right? And so I was like, oh no, Lord, if this is you, you're going to have to put this together. I am not touching that. And I was very, let's just say, gun shy. Okay. So my sponsor at the time done, lunch with me that Sunday. And she said, God wanted me to tell you that his design is you and JR. Well, I never even had a conversation with this guy. And I really honestly thought he might be a player, because he's real cute and all these girls would talk about him at CR. And so I was like, I don't want anything to do with that if that's the case. But God had spoke to him the same night. And little did I know that he had been taking Kingdom Man classes about how to be a husband and father. And he'd never been married or any of that. So our first conversation was pretty heavy. And he stepped into that role because he knew that God had made me for him, and vice versa. He stepped into that role, and with all my junk, with all my baggage, with all my stuff, gracefully. And he loved me, and not just me, he loved Peyton as his own. And I never knew a love like that could exist. Outside of Jesus, I never knew that. And he has actually increased my relationship with Jesus because of how he's loved me so well. And he's never judged me for my stuff. He's never condemned me because I did stupid stuff. He knew. I was like, do you know my past? Do you know what I've done? Do you know the level of ickiness? He's like, Derenda, I don't need to know any of that stuff, because I think about how God operates. What's the truth and the reality of the situation? The truth is that you were made for me and I was made for you. Everything else is details, and they don't really matter. And so we got engaged Thanksgiving of 19. We got married in COVID. And May the 29th, our anniversary is actually Wednesday. 4 years Wednesday we've been married. And 2 months later, we were pregnant with Sammy. And he was the completion of our little family. He is wild. Oh my goodness. He's a wild child. But he's the perfect storm. He really is. He's the sweetest, just And I love both of my boys so well in so many different ways. Like, I worried that I couldn't love another child like I loved Peyton. I'm just being honest with you. Like, how could I love another child like I loved this kid? And God just lengthens your love. Like, I don't know how to put it into words, but he just does. And my love for each of them is so different because my bond with them is so different. But not one of them is greater than the other. And we would have never dreamed we could ever had a home or anything like that. And we have a beautiful house out here in the country. This is Jesus's property. So like the way we do life is everybody has a seat at the table. You know, I don't have any tattoos. I'm not against tattoos. I'm just kind of a wimp when it comes to like getting a needle or whatever on my arm. But if I ever got a tattoo, I would get the one that says Judas 8-2, because I can relate to being the person that didn't deserve to sit there. But yet he pulled up the seat right beside of him and he washed my feet. That's the Jesus that I know. And so Judas 8-2, even in spite of all of his crazy stuff and the betrayal and everything else, Jesus loved him. And so the way that he's loved me has caused me to love people like that too. So everybody has a seat at the table at this house. God is continuing to show up and show out in so many things in our life. I have the crazy just privilege of leading Celebrate Recovery with my husband, leading worship at my church. I'm so undeserving to be ushering people into his presence. And that's went to a different level just because Jesus doesn't stop. He lavishly, recklessly, just crazy loves us. And thank God that life isn't fair, because what I would get if I deserved it, you know what I mean? What I would get. Because let's be real, in biblical time, like, women were stoned to death for things that I did. But he loves me recklessly, lavishly. And now, you know, I get to be in women's ministry. My job is, it's Mary Kay. I'm an independent sales director, but it's ministry for me all day long. I get to go into homes all the time, make women feel better about themselves, but I get to share Jesus with them. And God continues to lengthen my territory and puts me in front of more and more people. He's doing the same thing for my husband. I have so much time with my kids now. I have a relationship with my biological mother. Is it perfect? No. But is it present? Yes. And like I said, I'm so close to my parents. I'm so beyond blessed to have the most incredible people that we do life with, that are our friends, but we call them family. I'm so undeserving of what God's doing in my life. Hear my heart. Like, I'm so undeserving. But that's the way that when we find that our identity comes through Jesus Christ, not through all these other things we try to do, we realize that's what we needed all along. And so I'm happy to say that my identity is found in him today. That means I have to die to self every day. And that means that Derenda's ways don't work. And so every day I look at it as that me and Jesus are on an adventure. And wherever he wants me to go that day, I'll go. Whoever he wants me to go see, I'll see. Even doing this video, I'm just being very vulnerable with you. I know people are going to see this that are going to still judge me. I know people are going to see this that have been a part of my story, that maybe remember it different. I know there's going to be people on the other side of this that maybe have a different view of me after. But Jesus brought this to me, so that means it's for me. And I gave him my yes a long time ago. And I give it to him over and over and over again, multiple times a day. So when he brought this to me, I said yes again. So if this is something that can unlock somebody else's prison on the other side of this camera, then I've done what God's called me to do. But he gets the praise. He gets the glory. He gets the honor, not Derenda. Derenda messes it up. But Jesus somehow, some way, resurrects it. Thanks for letting me share my story.